Good morning. So, this is the 1 week mark in my carnivore diet, and I'll mention a couple of things that may be of interest. The most surprising thing that I discovered after I started it was this contention that vegetables are actually poisonous because they contain oxalic acid. That was an absolute eye opener for me. I didn't know about it. But as I recalled, my father always used to tell me that rhubarb leaves, he said, were poisonous because they contained oxalic acid, and to eat them would be to die. And it was impressed upon my mind. But of course, rhubarb leaves are no different to many other types of leaves that we eat regularly, and most particularly spinach, which is very high in oxalic acid. And we are told to consume vast quantities of spinach. And even the cartoon character, of course, Popeye, was showing us that consuming a lot of spinach would boost our strength. I was told that this was, I read, I think, that this was due to a misprint in an analytical study that had added or removed a zero from the milligrams of iron contained in spinach, and so thus increased it tenfold inadvertently. That sounds like a bit of a tall story to me, but that I'm sure you can find it if you look on the old internet. But perhaps it was more sinister than that. Particularly as spinach seems to be really the worst culprit. We shouldn't eat really any. But many things like that contain oxalic acid, and they're the reason for for the detriment of our bodies and our internal organs, because it's a poison and the liver can't handle it. This has been an absolute revelation for me. I've been carrying on with the carnivore diet, and I did make some unleavened bread 3 days ago. I did it after reading the prayer, the disciples' prayer, or reciting the disciples' prayer, I should say. It's a prayer I often recite, as I'm sure many of my brothers and sisters do, because Jesus told us to recite it, actually. I always recite it in the singular. I've probably mentioned that, and I would encourage others to think about that, because really we're not allowed, are we, to pray on behalf of another anywhere in the Bible. You can pray for other people, but you can't pray per interposta persona, as it were, inter alia. Lost the thread now, of course. Yes, reciting the Lord's Prayer and asking for my daily bread made me think, I can't not have bread in my diet to some extent. I don't know whether that's a reasonable conclusion to reach. Of course, you could say that bread in that verse just refers to food in general, and I suppose there is an argument for that. But anyway, I've made some unleavened bread, which I made basically like short crust pastry with lard and a little salt and a little water. And I rolled it flat and baked it in the oven for 20 minutes, and it's very nice, I have to say. It's probably not going to be agreeing with me all that much. I'm trying to work out now what foods, are upsetting the progress, because it hasn't been plain sailing. I have had a big increase in energy. I went for a walk a couple of days ago, and I walked for 8 miles, which is unheard of. And I wasn't even tired when I got back. But then I've had sleep problems and digestive issues, stomach cramps, also on several occasions. And I've managed to walk them off, or they've gone off, or I've used heat, but it's not been pleasant. And I think the reason for this happening, well, there could be several reasons, but one reason is my overuse, my use of coffee, because it only occurred to me after starting the diet that, of course, coffee is a plant and it contains oxalates, quite a lot actually. And so, it's not something that is really helpful. I was drinking decaf coffee. I thought, well, I'm not having the caffeine so much, but so I've had 2 coffees this morning. I mean, I was drinking 7 coffees a day easily. It was my go-to drink. I craved coffee. But now that I've understood that it's actually harming me, the craving will be removed because, I don't think as rational men and women we can crave things that harm us really, not or regret having to be without them. Nobody regrets not having a sword thrust below the 5th rib. And once you understand that's the danger of some of these substances, then, I can't really miss them, I think. So I've replaced coffee this morning now. I'm replacing coffee with bone broth. And I'll see how that goes on. And the other thing that I found more difficult has been cream. And, I was putting that in my coffee. And I'd actually gone out and got some of that lovely creme fraiche, or fraiche, I don't know how you pronounce it, which is very tasty indeed. And that doesn't seem to go down particularly well. And cheese is again a bit iffy, I've noticed, whereas butter is fine. My attempt is to sort of vary the diet, I suppose. One of the problems at starting it is that it is extremely restrictive, and because I was passing from a normal, not exactly normal, but a usual sort of diet, shall we say, I was very careful, but and I was doing intermittent fasting, which I've slightly abandoned on the carnivore because I understood that in the carnivore diet, the idea is to eat when you're hungry, which is actually, it makes so much sense that I can't really argue with it. I don't think anybody can. Perhaps not immediately, but you allow the hunger to build. Of course, hunger is helpful. It can produce energy in the body. Who was it that said, "Stay hungry, stay lean"? That was Steve Jobs, wasn't it? Steve Jobs at that final speech. There's a lot of truth that comes from the elite, of course. They do know the arcane secrets, but they often communicate them in cryptic ways because they are quite cunning in their craft, and that's why we need to be as wise as serpents ourselves to see their deceptions, because there's always deception woven in, isn't there? That's how they do it. They take a load of truth and then they'll just weave in those few lies which defile the entire doctrine. So the other thing that occurred to me this morning was to go to look in the Bible and in Genesis and see what it says about eating, because of course, I do take pay quite a bit of attention to the Word of God, as I'm sure many other people do. That's my predilection and my preference and my choice and my blessing, because it's the Lord that's put it in my heart. So in Genesis, I'll just turn there, if I've got the Bible open at that page. Oh, I've got the Bible open at that page, but I can't read it because these aren't my reading glasses. But it mentions that the green herbs are to be for the animals to eat, if you look at it. It gives us the fruit of every herb yielding seed, and that would seem to be referred to fruits of trees primarily. But it doesn't really give us the vegetable crops. So it seems to me. They're reserved for animal feed, and I think that would be correct. That would be the correct nutrition to follow. So it would seem to suggest that some fruits, or maybe all fruits, can be eaten. But our primary source of meat, presumably thereafter, became flesh, our herds and our flocks. And really, our people, since Israel, we grew up among our herds and our flocks, and they kept us anchored to the land, and we roamed the land with our herds and our flocks, and we moved between our wells, and it was our way of life. There was a level of dynamism in our world. And I can imagine it would be, a very beautiful thing to be traveling with your flocks, perhaps to seek pastures new. I used to like watching the westerns when they'd go on the droves, and they'd be riding into the wilderness with a big herd of cattle. And then there would always be the stampede scene and some heroism to admire. But our flocks were important to us, and I think that's why this deception has been practiced, because if it is a deception, as I'm starting to believe, then it must have been practiced deliberately upon us. Surely, it isn't something that happened by chance, that we are told by the government that we must eat 5 portions of greens every day, and it turns out that greens are poisonous, and that we're told by the government that fat and too much fat is the cause of all sorts of diseases, and it turns out that it's the cure for those diseases. I mean, I'm not, the people that have studied this stuff would have known this. They had to at some level. I'm not suggesting that the people who go to university necessarily knew it, but they're already indoctrinated, aren't they, once they get to that level. But actually a child could know many of these things, really, because when you think how children very often react when they're fed with vegetables, it's curious, isn't it? They tend to spit them out. We should teach our children, but we should also, learn from them to some extent, especially when they exhibit behaviors that you might consider to be instinctive, because they are in touch with their primal instincts far more so. They haven't developed the social shell that encases us all in lies. It was Churchill who said, wasn't it, that the truth must be protected by a bodyguard of lies. That's an extraordinary statement, isn't it? It just seems to be quite logic, but in a certain manner of speaking, um, I suppose he's right. I suppose that's what happens, isn't it? The truth, which is Lord Jesus Christ, is actually cloaked in a massive bodyguard of lies to prevent, to try to ward off the diligent seeker into some, you know, side path, and not allow him or her to reach the total freedom and grace that lies at the foot of the cross. Anyway, I shall proceed with my diet. I'll do definitely another week and perhaps longer. And I'll let everybody know if anybody's interested how it's going, and whether I would recommend. So far, I would think I would recommend it, but a degree of, caution. And of course, everybody has to follow their own preferences in these things, like everything else. One thing that I have noticed, it seems like quite a kind of a guyish thing to do, kind of manly kind of thing, just to be cooking meat. I like that aspect of it. And if I had the coin, or when I have the coin, I will be getting a barbecue, a large barbecue oven, so that I want to do most of my cooking outside, because the problem that I'm finding is my house is quite small, and I don't like it having, meat fumes in the house, from fat fumes. It seems to be just unnecessary. That sort of stuff should be done outside if possible. So that makes it more urgent that I should complete my the awning that I'm going to build on the side of the house, on the back of the house here, to make a protected area also, that it can be used even in inclement weather. I think an outdoor grill, and I'll probably have, I won't do gas. I'll do the coal type, the charcoal type. I prefer it. Um, if I get a long enough chimney that I'm not, disturbing my neighbours, um, I suppose that would be important. Anyway, I'll update as and when. God bless everyone.